We're really glad that you could join us today. I'm Corey Norman. I'm the Chief of Staff for Senator John Curtis, and I'll act as your moderator today. You're here because you're part of the Senator's email list, one of the key ways that we connect with Utahns across the state. We encourage you to keep an eye out for updates. You can also follow the Senator on Facebook, on Instagram, and on X. His handle is, as the lingo goes, is Senator John Curtis. That's a good way for you to stay informed about what's happening in Washington, D.C. and back home in Utah. When you signed up for the event, you had the chance to submit questions to the Senator. We've reviewed those, and there have been hundreds, and grouped some of those together in major topics that we're going to try to cover today. If your exact question isn't answered, it's because it's really just because of time. But we've included your contact. If you've included your contact information, then we'll put that in the queue and make sure that you do receive a response. Senator Curtis will begin by sharing some of the big wins that he's had since coming to the Senate, and then share some of the even bigger things, bills that he and the team are working on right now. When he's done sharing those, we'll go directly into addressing some of those questions that you submitted. We're excited to get things started and hear directly from Senator Curtis. So, Senator, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Corey. Corey, if everybody listening doesn't know, Corey's been my chief now for 8 years, and I appreciate your help, Corey. Thanks to all of you that have joined us. We literally had 1,300 people register for this, and I can see many of those are online. I'm actually going to switch the order just a little bit, Corey, and jump into the shutdown. I have a feeling that is foremost on everybody's minds. So let me do that. Then we'll share a few of the things that I'm working on, and then we'll also spend some time with your questions. Well, the best way to describe this shutdown is, I call it opposite day. Everything about this shutdown is kind of backwards. And let me give you some examples of what I mean. I think it's fair to say historically that Republicans have initiated most of the shutdowns. I think there's one in particular that got labeled the Schumer shutdown. That might be a little different, but normally speaking, Republicans have used this opportunity to kind of put a foot down and say, hey, no, we're not going to open the government until we get X. And a lot of times X is dealing with spending. I think it's been a pretty common theme for Republicans to say, hey, we're spending too much money. We're not going to open the government until we get these cuts. And I don't mind telling you, I've been here since 2017. This has never gone well for Republicans. It's just not been a good thing. And I think as a general rule, Republicans were growing very weary of shutdowns. We haven't done one for a number of years. I'm pretty sure we haven't done one since Speaker Mike Johnson came in. Speaker Johnson's been pretty aggressive, I would say, about avoiding shutdowns. And so imagine everybody's surprised when the roles reversed and Republicans said, hey, no, let's just do a continuing resolution, which we normally don't do. And Democrats said, hold it, not so fast. We have a legislative priority. We're going to demand that you do that before we open the government. When I say backwards day, I think everybody would agree, a total reversal of roles. And what was really interesting is at the beginning of the shutdown, it's not so much now, you would hear Republicans constantly quote Democrats from previous shutdowns when they said shutdowns are bad, you shouldn't shut down. And Democrats constantly quote Republicans explaining why they were shutting down. And that's what I mean by backwards day. Well, there's other things about the shutdown that are backwards and opposite. And for instance, President Obama famously caused pinch points and points that were painful points. And one of the great examples of that is a lot of veterans flew back to Washington, D.C. during a shutdown under President Obama, and he taped off the war memorials and wouldn't let them go to them, causing a pain point. Military wasn't paid, to my recollection, and there was just no effort to try to avoid the pain points. And as a result, it brought it to a head sooner. Members of Congress would hear from people back home because of the pain points, and that put a lot of pressure. This one is very, very different. Now it's starting to change, but for the first, I'll say 4 weeks, there were very few, if any, pain points. Members of Congress were not hearing from people who, for instance, were missing flights. We weren't hearing from military who were missing paychecks because President Trump was paying the military. And the mall, I mentioned taping off monuments. The mall's been open. The trash has been emptied. For a while, the museums were kept open. And some of those traditional pain points just weren't there. And so for a long time, members of Congress were just not hearing from folks back home to demand that they change that. I think it's fair to say, too, that if you're a Democrat, you're hearing from your base, hey, you're doing the right thing, keep going. And if you're a Republican, you're hearing from your base, hey, you're doing the right thing, keep going. And as a result, we now are in the longest shutdown in the country's history. And those pain points are starting to be manifest. I don't mind saying the federal workers is clearly one of those. All of my staff, they're not receiving paychecks. The Capitol Hill police that I walk by every day are not receiving paychecks. The TSA that we go by in the airport are not receiving paychecks. It's true that the military has been paid so far, but I think there's close to about 1.4 million federal workers not receiving paychecks. And of course, I feel, and I think most people agree strongly, that this is why shutdowns are not a good tool, because it punishes the wrong people. Many people know that by constitutional mandate, members of Congress continue to get paid during the shutdown. So the very people who should be having their pay withheld are being paid, and punishing the people that have nothing to do with the shutdown. Now, this is a really good time for me to point out that a lot of members, and myself included, and I've always done this at the beginning of every shutdown, I instruct the clerk not to pay me. I think it's the least that I could do. I think if more members of Congress withheld their pay, we would end this a whole lot sooner. But there are some who continue to be paid during this. I actually had a bill I ran every year in the House. I think Mike Kennedy is running it now. It's called No Work, No Pay, which is if you're a member of Congress and you're shut down, you don't get paid. Now, I hear a lot, why don't you just negotiate with the Democrats and end this? And I'd like to address that. First of all, let me explain what the Democrats are asking. And I believe, I just think there's a lot of bad information out there. And I think I'm going to tell you the truth. You fact checked me if you don't think I'm right. And sure, it's coming from a Republican perspective, and there may be some bias in it. I don't think so. Republicans have been very clear from the beginning that they want to extend permanently the subsidies given under President Biden for the Affordable Care Act. Now, where a lot of the bad information comes in is it's implied that these are Affordable Care Act, Obamacare subsidies. They're not. Nobody's touching the subsidies that were put in place when Affordable Care Act was put into place. These are subsidies that during COVID, President Biden and the Democratic House and Democratic Senate put in place without a single Republican vote to get us through COVID. The Democrats themselves put an expiration date on those, which is the end of the year. So the subsidies they put in during COVID to be temporary are going to expire. And that's what they want to extend, not a year, but they want to extend them permanently. I've heard different numbers, but the number is well over $1 trillion of the cost to do that. And of course, the Democrats have not come forward with even $1 of cost savings to pay for this additional $1 trillion of expense. Now, in addition, what's interesting about these subsidies, so let me also address this, that you often hear it from the perspective of, we have to do this because the costs are going up. That is not true. The costs may be going up a little bit, as they do every year. It's that the subsidies are being removed, and that's what makes the insurance more expensive. It's not that the costs are going up. It's simply that the subsidies are being removed. Now, I have some feelings about subsidies. I'll come back to that in a moment, but let me talk about these specific subsidies. They took the cap off, President Biden did, and so people up to 400% of poverty are getting these subsidies. So this is just a real rough number, but that would put somebody at about $120,000 with about 4 kids getting zero premium on their Obamacare premiums. That is something I think needs to be discussed for several reasons. You could make a case, depending upon what city somebody lived in, that 120 with 4 kids, they need help. I'm not going to argue that. Let's have that conversation. but zero premium. There's a difference between helping them and giving them zero premium. It's estimated that 6 million people don't even know they have this coverage because there's zero premium. Insurance brokers signed them up, and the federal government has been paying for their insurance, and they don't even know they have it because they don't receive a bill. If the bill was even $1, they would then say, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for that. So I think where I'm going with this is to say there is a conversation to be had about should Congress step in and deal with these expiring subsidies for some people who desperately need them. All of those conversations were going on before the shutdown, and if, as a matter of fact, very intently on a bipartisan basis. The shutdown ended all of them. And now that's kind of the irony of this is Democrats are saying, hey, unless you not only just negotiate this, unless you do this, we're not going to open the government back up. And I think one of the things Republicans learned from the years of shutdowns that we've done is you want to go into that with an exit plan. And when you go into a shutdown, Democrats don't do a lot of shutdowns. I don't think they realize that. So they have no exit plan from here other than this off-ramp that Republicans concede, spend over $1 trillion in subsidizing zero premiums for people at all levels, whether they need it or not. Now, during this process, Republicans have tried a number of different approaches to this. So, for instance, we are very close to a number of the appropriations. And if we pass those categories of the government would be funded while we dealt with the unfunded ones. And we can't even get Democrats to vote for those, even though they came out of committee on a very bipartisan basis and were agreed to. The reason why is the Democrats don't want to spend that. If they pass those appropriations, it takes the pressure off the shutdown. So here again, people say, well, why won't Republicans just negotiate with Democrats? I feel like it's like we went to a gunfight without a bullet in our gun. We didn't ask anything. We sold them a car and the car was free. So how do you negotiate when you're not asking anything? Republicans have said simply, no, we have no legislative priorities that we're trying to add to this. We're just simply trying to open the government. So there is like that this doesn't give you a plate for negotiation, especially when the other side says it's everything we want or nothing. And so here we are, and we're locked in that. Let me just quickly address subsidies as well. Every time the government adds a subsidy to something, the cost goes up. So I think a much better conversation to have on healthcare would be how do we make prices go down so we don't have to subsidize it? And that's probably for another town hall at another time, but we can spend a lot of things on that. And I think those are far more valuable questions right now. And I'll just also point out that during this period of time, during the 5 weeks, we have sent votes through to pay furloughed employees, turned down by the Democrats. We sent votes through to pay essential workers, turned down by the Democrats. We voted on ending the shutdown well over a dozen times, turned down by the Democrats. So you can see why those of us that are back here are frustrated with the narrative that all you need to do is just go work with the Democrats. They hold all the cards, and until they're ready to end the shutdown, we're in the shutdown. All right, Chief, I'm happy. If you think I missed anything on that, I'm happy to, or kind of move on to the
we can go ahead and move on. I know you wanted to hit a couple of things. You want to talk about FOFA and the
Yep. So just a couple of things I'm working on, and then we'll default to the questions. One of the bills that I'm very, very excited about, it's called Fix Our Forest. One of the biggest problems in the West and in Utah has been forest fires. And there's always been a big contention between Republicans and Democrats about what to do about it. Republicans would say, hey, you're not allowing us to go in and remove the dead timber, the fuel on the floor. So, of course, these places burn. It can take, for instance, up to 5 years to get permits for people to do what we call a prescribed burn. Democrats have pushed back and said, hey, when we let you go into the forest, you just take all the trees down. We don't want you to let you go take all the trees down. And so we just don't get any progress on that. But I'm really pleased to say that working with Republican Senator Sheehy from Montana, Democrat Senator Padilla from California, Democrat Senator Hickenlooper from Colorado, two Republicans and two Democrats, we have a groundbreaking bill on managing our forest where we've reached consensus on these really difficult issues. I think it's exactly what the American people expect us to do. Work with our colleagues, find solutions, find those common areas. I can tell you, none of the four of us feel like we've compromised our values. We all feel like we've landed in a really, really good place. And that bill came through committee on an overwhelming bipartisan basis. It was expected to get to the floor and pass the Senate on an overwhelming bipartisan basis. The House has already indicated that they like it and that they'll move forward on it. And it's Senator Sheehy. I think he went a little too far on this. He described it as impactful as the New Deal. That's probably a little bit of hyperbole, but just to give you a sense of this is a big deal that we're super excited about. We've had a number of bills, two bills pass already through the Senate in our short time here. As you know, this is a team that likes to really legislate and get things done. I also want to point out that during the shutdown, my office, who has been given awards as the #1 constituent office in the past for constituent outreach, is open. Our employees are coming in, even though they're not being paid, both in Washington, D.C. and in the state. So please continue to reach out to us. They will do their best to contact the federal agencies that may be closed, but our office certainly can start working on whether it's a visa or passport or immigration, all those issues that we get calls for in our office. We're still open for business and would love to take those calls. So with that, Chief, should we jump into some of the questions?
Absolutely love to. Just again, these questions were submitted and tried to be organized because there were certainly some themes. The first one we're given Lisa from Ogden the credit for this question. What can you do to meet budget deadlines in the future so temporarily funding the government isn't necessary?
So, Lisa, this is going to feel like a setup because I have such a good answer for this question. But I want you to know that Lisa and I didn't work together on this question. I have a bill that is brilliant, in my own opinion, and would solve all of this. It's actually modeled after what we do in Utah. That's where my idea came from. And just real quickly, in Utah, at the beginning of every legislative session, they agree. If they don't agree on a budget, they stay on last year's budget. Well, I tried that and people didn't like it back here, so I've twisted it a little bit. And what my bill does is we have these 12 appropriations. So we appropriate in 12 different categories. Constitutionally, we're supposed to do that, not constitutionally, by law, we're supposed to do that every 12 months, or they expire, and that's when we go into a shutdown. You may be interested to know, since 1974, we have done our 12 appropriations on time, exactly 4 times. That's how dysfunctional and broken the system is. My bill is remarkably simple. It simply says when you do an appropriation, it doesn't expire until you do the next appropriation, meaning that would always stay active. You'd never go into a shutdown until there's enough pressure to do a new appropriations, that previous one stays in place. Trying to get some momentum behind that. I think it's fair to say there's a number of my colleagues that like the system the way it is. It's broken and that serves them actually really well, and we end up spending a lot more money that way. So I'll keep working on that bill and other ideas that are out there.
One interesting thing that I know that you've said before at town hall meetings, when you talk about the budget, you mentioned the Tea Party and the Tea Party movement that came in, and this goes to the system. You want to just touch on that super quick?
Yeah, so the Tea Party, as everybody knows, they came in with a real agenda to reduce the budget. We are now spending 300% more than when the Tea Party came in. And that just shows you that it's more than just forcing shutdowns. It's more than just demanding that we spend less. Our system is broken, and we've got to make some changes to the system.
Appreciate it. We're going to give Todd from Provo the credit for this.
Go Provo.
What is your view on breaking the Senate filibuster to move forward on a CR and an end to the government shutdown?
So
if against a break in the filibuster, what is the path forward to propose to end the shutdown?
Okay, so first of all, let me talk about the filibuster in a little broader sense than just this application. And just quickly, I think a lot of people understand it, but quickly, what it is right now the Senate operates on rules. And there is an exemption to this, and I kind of want to put that aside because I don't want to go too far into the weeds. But generally speaking, it takes 60 votes in the Senate to pass anything. You can imagine you don't get 60 Democrats or 60 Republicans. And so therefore, no matter what the mix is, you always need some Republicans or Democrats to get legislation through. It has been a very, what I would say, a leveling factor in our democracy over the years that this has been in place. Instead of getting these wild swings back and forth, you have to get some from the other party to agree with you, which keeps the wild swings. So, for example, it was rumored, and I'm just going to use that word rumored because you don't know what actually would have happened, that the Democrats, when they had President Biden, had the Senate and the House, if they didn't have this rule, they would have added people to the Supreme Court. They would have made D.C. a state. They would have changed national election laws and a whole long list of things that were Democratic priorities at the time. Now, when we have President Trump, the House and the Senate, we would do ours. We would ram through our priorities and probably undo the Democrats' priorities of a few years ago. And you can see why that would not be healthy for the country. And so a lot of us feel strongly that we need to keep that 60 vote threshold, and I'm one of them. So now as it applies to the shutdown, a lot of people would say, well, if you change that rule, you now have enough Republican votes to end the shutdown. My response to that would be, if we ever change that, this is the last thing we would change it for. This is a temporary situation. It doesn't make any sense. And by the way, I wouldn't change it even for any, there's no situation I can conceive where I would change that rule, certainly not for the shutdown. So to the second part of his question, well, then if you're not going to use that, how do you get out of the shutdown? You come together and you agree that shutdowns are not the right way to force your legislative agenda, which is what Democrats told us for years and years and years and years. And let's get the government open. It just is a simple vote. We've already had 3 Democrats say they would join us. We need 4 more. And that's how we end the shutdown.
I appreciate that. This one, we're going to do Brad from Taylorsville. It seems there are daily news reports about the abuse of power by the executive branch, National Guard troops in cities, tariffs, and threats of tariffs, tearing down the east wing of the White House, and so forth. Why doesn't Congress act to rein in these actions?
So, first of all, Brad, I'm going to acknowledge that it's a real thing. My Democratic colleagues like to use the term flood the zone. It's a real thing. But let me also push back a little bit at the same time on the question. Our founders perceived this exact situation, and they gave us tools. And let me talk about what some of those tools are, show you where they're being used and maybe where they could be used better. Our courts, I think people sometimes forget they want Congress to do all the reining in. Yes, that is some of our responsibility, but the courts are also doing that. And by the way, if you look over the last 10 months, I think you'll see a number of court rulings that have pushed back on the president's authority. Really interesting, the Supreme Court working now on tariffs. If those of you that are following that, I think there's a more than a small chance, I think there's a very large chance that the Supreme Court will tell the president he can't do the tariffs. And so I would like to point out, this is not all legislatively. The 3 branches work really well together. Now, as far as the legislative branch, there are a number of tools that we have. And I don't mind telling you, as a new senator, I'm learning about those. They don't give you a handbook when you walk in and say, like, here's all the perfect tools for reining in the president. And so let me give you a couple of examples. There was an executive order that I was not happy with. And so me and a small group withheld the nominees for Treasury, which is where that executive order was going through, until we felt like that we had resolved that. So holding back on something like nominees and holding our authority back is one example of how we can do that. We also have a vote, and the president has a lot of legislation that he wants passed. And on the big, beautiful bill, there was a period of time when I had told him, look, I can't get to a yes. And I was actually able to change some pretty significant executive priorities in a way that I think benefited Utah in a really remarkable way. And that's not all. So I'm the Western Hemisphere chair the Western Hemisphere Committee in the Foreign Relations. And right now we're putting a hearing together to talk about what's going on in Venezuela and with the bombing of the boats. And so we have hearings, we have platforms, right, where we can bring officials in from the administration and others, and we're putting that together. And that's one of the tools. The other thing I'd say is if you don't see us pushing back, you can't assume nothing is happening. I think some of the most effective pushback is not public. I try to not damage relationships. And so, for instance, if I'm out in the press kind of like demanding that the president change this, then that's hard on relationships. So a lot of what's happening, people will never see. And a lot of it is behind the scenes where we're working on things that are important to us and shaping the executive branch. And so I'm very the first to say, hey, look, it is a flood the zone moment. We're not getting everything. Some of us rely on people who are outside of our area of expertise, and some people will lean on me for things inside my expertise. But it's a constant thing, and I think all of us in the Senate realize it doesn't matter who the president is. We have a real responsibility to protect the legislative branch. So, Brad, just know it's a continual thing that we work on, and that I will continue to keep working on it and make sure that I'm doing all I can to enforce the Senate's power.
Thanks, Brad. This next question comes from the thriving metropolis of Draper. This is Brooke. Will Congress take back the power to create international tariffs if the Supreme Court rules against the president, and how would that look?
Yeah, super interesting question. And I may answer it just slightly different because, Brooke, really what we should do is take it back regardless of what the Supreme Court does. One of the problems is right now, if we were to take it back, you have to get a veto-proof number of votes to take it back. That's a very, very high bar. And so I'm not sure that would happen. I was talking to my staff about it earlier this week. I do think there's actually going to be a sweet spot in this president's presidency where we may be able to say, look, now the president's been in, he's getting closer to the end of his term. Before a new president comes in, let's get this fixed. And I think hopefully you could get some bipartisan perspective there. Now, the other thing is, this is what the Supreme Court's deciding. Did we give the president this power? And like I say, I'm not a lawyer, but I think most people that listen to the arguments the other day feel like that there's a high likelihood the Supreme Court will say no. And so then it's not a matter of us taking it back. The Supreme Court has determined he doesn't have it. But now we got a really interesting question is we've collected hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs. And what do we do with those? And I think we should act as Congress to decide, are those somehow returned? Are they, I would love to just take it and put it towards the deficit. And I do think Congress has a really specific role once the Supreme Court makes their decision. So hopefully I know that's kind of a confusing issue. Hopefully I answered that for you.
Thanks, Brooke, for asking that question. Next one comes from Moab. This is from Stephen. And he asks, how can we protect our public lands from environmentalists' overreach who want to lock up the land and keep anyone from being able to use it?
Well, Stephen, if you're in Moab, this is a big deal in Utah. And I had the honor of representing Bears Ears for 7 years and got really into the weeds on those public lands issues. I've also represented Grand County, spent a lot of time on your public lands. I now represent, of course, the whole state with Grand Staircase. And let me just start by saying this. I believe it's a false narrative to say that we can't have it both. And what I mean by both is that we can't protect, preserve these lands and use them, recreate in them, and enjoy them. And oftentimes this debate comes down to put a gate around all of them, don't let anybody in, or everybody gets to go in and do anything that they want. And the truth is, like I say, that's a false narrative. I've watched firsthand places like Emery County resolve these public lands issues in a way that accommodates both. It was really interesting. In Emery County, we did one of the state's largest public lands bills ever. And we brought in all the stakeholders, the ranchers, the extraction, the environmentalists, the off-road enthusiasts, and we designated areas where it was appropriate to recreate. We designated areas where it was appropriate to extract, areas where it was appropriate to keep it preserved and protected. And you know what we found? There was enough room for all of it, this abundance mentality. What happens, unfortunately, is we get into these executive orders, particularly the Antiquities Act, that go around Congress. And when you go around Congress, you don't get consensus. And therefore, as the president comes in, you do this flip-flopping back and forth between Republican and Democrats. And really, the best answer to your question is to not let the executive branch do that, but put it into legislation. Because if it's in legislation, that means we had to find consensus between these different groups. And I'm telling you, we can find consensus. This is a false narrative that there's not enough to do everything that we want there. So I'm really proud of my team that's I think been really innovative on this. We'll continue to work on it and make sure, Stephen, that in Moab you still have access to these beautiful, beautiful places. And at the same time, make sure, so do our grandkids, right? We all want to preserve them for future generations as well.
One of my favorite comparisons that you make is about how every county is like its own country. And they have different set of issues in Grant County versus Emery County versus San Juan County versus Paiute versus Washington. Anybody who thinks that one county or one solution fits them all is just naive.
It's really true. They're as different as countries sometimes, and their needs. All right, what's our next one?
This next one comes from Lynn from Cottonwood Heights. When will the issues with Social Security be addressed? Do you see this happening before the trust fund is exhausted and benefits begin being automatically reduced?
I love this question. In my maiden speech, we all give a maiden speech, and you use that to kind of lay out your priorities. I talked about this and how we're really not being honest with the American people when we say we're not going to touch Social Security. In the last election, both presidential candidates said, "Oh, we're not going to touch it." Well, that's not true. In 2034, as she realizes, as Lynn realizes, sorry, I don't know if it's a she or he. Sorry, Lynn. When Lynn realizes, they are cut about 25%. So I've made a commitment to lean into this. We actually are scheduling 3 different Social Security roundtables between now and the end of the year, where I will come and we're going to pull together some seniors, some young people, and some business people in these 3 different groups. And we have what I call a calculator that says, if we move the age, here's what happens. If we move the amount that we take for your paycheck, here's what happens. And we want to bring these people in and help them decide which levers we should pull to save Social Security. I also believe this is another false narrative that you can't save Social Security and at the same time not hurt people in or near Social Security. But if we don't make changes, then people who are in their 20s or 30s and their 40s now, it will break. And so, Lynn, I'm committed to work on that. And even though it's seemingly unpopular, I don't think it is, but it's seemingly unpopular, we'll weigh into that. And I hope you'll hear from our office soon on that.
Our next question comes from Jennifer from Springville, where I used to live. What can we do as a nation to generate enough energy for both our AI needs and our human needs to stay globally competitive?
Okay, obviously, this is a very informed constituent, Jennifer. This is a big deal. The needs for AI are dramatic. Just one data center alone uses as much energy as the entire state of Wyoming. And we're trying to dot the country with these data centers. And people, rightly so, are very worried about what this will do to their utility bills. As these data centers who can afford to pay a lot more for energy come along and take that energy, one of the big fears is the utility rates are going to go up. So one thing we have to do is isolate utility payers from these large demands, and the people putting in these data centers have got to come up with solutions for energy that don't rob energy from our people who are heating their homes and their businesses and cooling their homes and their businesses. Now we can do that, and we are seeing that. We're seeing people open up closed nuclear plants. We're seeing, most data centers that are coming online now are coming with a plan to provide their energy. But the biggest bottleneck in all of this is the difficulty of building projects. It takes years and years and years to permit some of these projects. So one of my largest legislative priorities right now is dealing with the difficulty of getting these projects done because primarily of government bureaucracy. And eliminating that will have more to do with us not only protecting ratepayers, but providing the energy we need for these facilities, as well as becoming energy dominant around the world. When we're energy dominant around the world, we get to make the rules, and we like that. When we're energy dominant around the world, it facilitates our economy. That's not going to happen if it takes 5 years to permit a gas plant, if it takes 10 years to permit a nuclear plant. So number one priority for Curtis' team legislatively is this permitting issue. And I actually think it's one of the most important things that we can do for the economy, for overall cost of living, and for our national security.
We have a question from Ella from Provo. Will you encourage the Trump administration to use available funds to fully fund SNAP benefits for the month of November?
Yeah, of course. I think we all will. The worry is there are a number of questions about are the funds adequate? How long will the funds go? And where do these funds come from? And so I know the courts were weighing in on what President Trump could use and what he couldn't use. I don't know any of us that doesn't want everything possible to be used to make sure we're meeting those SNAP benefits. But at some point, as the shutdown goes on, we run out of those options as well, which is just one of the why shutdowns are a bad idea to do.
Appreciate it. Just a reminder, as we're looking to wrap, if you have any questions or have any additional comments, please go to curtis.senate.gov. You're welcome to submit a question on there. And again, we're going to try to get to most of the questions that we were not able to answer today and try to get you answers on those as long as you've given your contact information. I've been with the senator for many, many years, and we've done over 400 town hall meetings, well over 400 at this point. So certainly appreciated his accessibility. If you have anything, Senator, as we wrap up, anything you want to end with?
Yeah, I'll just point out that we obviously love doing these in person. Since January, the Senate has been in Utah about 22 days. And it's just getting around the state, meeting everybody around the state and doing town halls has pushed us to more of these virtual ones. We'll continue to do these. And as we get an opportunity, we'll continue to find ways to connect with you. The chief mentioned, and I'll just double down on it, curtis.senate.gov, sign up for the newsletter. You'll hear from me weekly. And that's where we'll also be advertising as we do these town halls. Thanks to all of you that have joined us. I hope this has been helpful to you, and hope we get this shutdown over very soon. That would be in everybody's best interest.
Thanks, everybody.